Hello, everybody. So, this is a lecture on the topic of if you can be any fruit, what fruit would you choose? What fruit would you choose to be if you could be any fruit? So, first of all, we have to understand this question. So, this question is asking if the first part of the question is if you would be any fruit. So there's basically two ways to understand this when it says if you can be any fruit. Either it's asking if you could turn yourself into a fruit, or it's asking if you could have been born as a fruit. In other words, either it's asking um, if you yourself now could turn into a fruit, or it's asking if you could have changed the past and make it such that you um, would have existed only as a fruit. Um, Now, in either case, it's a bit unclear whether this is a possible scenario to even imagine. In the first scenario, if it's talking about turning yourself into a fruit, so what does it mean to turn yourself into a fruit? You could imagine a machine that you point it like a gun, and you point the gun at someone, and the person turns into a fruit. But what would really be happening in that scenario is the person would cease to exist, and a fruit would exist instead. It's not really the person being changed into a fruit, it's the person no longer existing and the fruit existing. Even if the matter in the person, you know, was reshaped on a molecular level to turn into a fruit, right? Imagine that, if you weigh 100 pounds, you're turned into the fruit that's created is created out of that same mass, and now it's 100-pound fruit. So it's your mass is turned into a fruit's mass. I still wouldn't call that you being turned into a fruit because you are killed in the process, and it is you are being killed and a fruit is being created out of your mass because you are more than your mass. If you're a living human being, you are, if you die, even your mass still exists, your body still exists, but that's not you, that's your carcass. So it wouldn't be you that's being turned into a fruit, it would be your carcass being turned into a fruit. Now, you could so you would have to therefore interpret the question. So either you could say that you have some fundamental spiritual essence, and that essence is preserved in the fruit, that this fruit sort of shares your soul. um but generally, I don't believe that if fruits have souls. I certainly don't believe that the soul of a fruit is in any way similar to the soul of a human. You could, but I don't think the question is is trying to assume anything about souls and fruits having souls. So I don't think that's the intention of the question. I guess the question is assuming that the fruit that you are turned into shares certain characteristics of you. In other words, that for example, your brain is still intact, and therefore, when you are turning into a fruit, you know, it still is you because you still are conscious in some way. But then the question is, can a fruit be conscious? Um, I mean, obviously, you can imagine a fruit that is conscious, that is conscious, but but then we're identifying you with your consciousness, and in that case, you're not being turned into a fruit. It's just that your consciousness, which is currently inhabiting your body, would then be inhabiting your fruit. Would then be inhabiting a fruit. You're not being turned into a fruit. Your body is being turned into a fruit, right? It's you can't have it both ways. Either you are your body or you are your consciousness. If you are your body, then when you're being turned into a fruit, your body is not existing anymore. Well, okay, if you are your body, then when your body's turning into a fruit, then that is you being turned into a fruit. But it, even if you are your body, that doesn't mean that you are the mass of your body. it means that you are your body as your body exists as a human, as a live living thing. And then if that living human body is no longer a human body and is now a fruit body, it's not you being turned into a fruit, it's that you are ceasing to exist. And alternatively, if you are not your body and you are your consciousness, then even if your consciousness now inhabits a fruit, it's still not you being turned into a fruit. It's your consciousness, which is previously inhabiting your body, is now inhabiting a fruit. So for you to turn into a fruit, it would have to mean that your consciousness is turning into a fruit. And if your consciousness is now a fruit, then it's not your consciousness anymore. Even if a fruit can be conscious, that doesn't mean that a fruit is consciousness, which would have to happen if the consciousness is turning into a fruit. So, looking at the question as though it's asking if you're turning into a fruit doesn't make too much sense. You could also look at the question as asking, as saying that no, it's not saying you were turning into a fruit. It's saying you always were a fruit. In other words, if time were different, such that you always were a fruit. But even then, the problems are similar. When we say you always were a fruit, what's the you that always was a fruit? If your consciousness was always a fruit, well, your fruit can't be a consciousness. And if it's saying your consciousness is inhabiting in a fruit, then it's the same problem. So I'm not sure. Sort of, in that sense, it's unclear exactly sort of what the question is asking. Or what is the you that's being turned into a fruit? I mean, I guess there are other ways of looking at you. If you say, for example, you are your genetic DNA, for instance, then is it saying that that DNA is inhabited by a fruit? But I mean, it doesn't really make sense to identify you as your DNA. I mean, so I think that in any fruit can't be you. Yeah, I mean, again, if you are your body, and it would have to mean that you are your body as your body exists and is alive now. I guess the only way to sort of make sense of the question is, let's say you had a fruit that that was sort of the same species as a human. In other words, let's say you could imagine a species of human that was like a human fruit hybrid that, like, suppose, what's the defining characteristic of a fruit, right? So I mean, I don't know. I mean, let's say there's certain botanical requirements that a fruit has to have. For instance, it has to have seeds. It has to do photosynthesis. It has to be the part of a tree that where the seeds are located. So, like, for example, like, if the fruit is the part of a tree where seeds are located, then let's say you had some organism called, like, a human tree, and this human tree, like, looked like a normal tree, but the way it reproduced more of itself, instead of like dropping like apples that had seeds, or whatever, it dropped humans, right? It dropped humans out of its branches, and those humans would fall to the floor, and those humans would come with some kind of seed in their mouth, and they would take the seed out of their mouth and put that seed in the ground, and then another human tree would be created, and it would create more humans from that human tree, right? So such a theoretical tree, which we can imagine and hypothesize about, would have fruits that are humans, and these humans would be genetically human, like they would have the capacity to reproduce with other humans. So in that case, such a fruit, right? You could be that kind of fruit, or you could turn into that kind of fruit. What would that mean? It would mean that you would, I don't know, get this kind of seed in your mouth or something, or have some other properties that would enable you to be the fruit of this tree while remaining a human. And then if you identify, and then you could sort of turn into this kind of fruit while still being yourself. So it is still you that is turning into the fruit, not you ceasing to exist. And similarly, you could also imagine saying that you would have been born as this kind of fruit. So the only sort of answer to the question, if you would have been a fruit, what kind of fruit would you be? Would be some sort of imaginary fruit that doesn't exist, but which we can hypothesize about and postulate. And that's the only answer that could possibly be truthful to say that you, in any counterfactual world, that you would be that fruit. So when we ask what kind of fruit would you choose to be, I think you don't actually have a choice, because there isn't it's not like you could be a lemon or you could be a coconut or whatever, because it is impossible for you to be a coconut. It's possible to imagine, God can turn you into a coconut, but that wouldn't be you being a coconut. That would be God's killing you and God's creating a coconut. So that's sort of my take on this question. Thank you for